Selling Game Passes on Roblox is the best way to earn Robux from your games, but they can be very hard to make. I'm going to teach you how to make a Game Pass selling system for your Roblox games, which you can reuse forever. Let's get started. Step 1. We need to create Game Passes to sell. You can do this on the website create.roblox.com. Find the experience you want to create a Game Pass in. Scroll to Passes on the left and click Create a Pass. For the tutorial, I'm making 3 passes, a VIP pass, 2 times gold, and 2 times gems so that we can have some variety. Make sure you go into each pass on sales, click item for sale and set a price, otherwise we won't be able to test this in-game. For your Game Passes, you can also upload custom images if you want, but for the tutorial, we're not necessarily going to be doing that for all of them. Once they're all set up and you can see the price, let's go back to Studio. Before we can just sell Game Passes to a player though, we need a way to save the data about the owned Game Passes for each player. That's where ProfileStore comes in. ProfileStore is a data store module which handles Roblox data saving and data stores for you. It's easy to learn, easy to set up, and eventually forget, because you can just copy and paste it into all of your new games. We're going to use ProfileStore to save Game Pass data today. Now, this tutorial is actually part 3 of my ProfileStore series, but you only need to watch part 1 to follow along. To set up ProfileStore for this step of the video, pause the video, go watch my beginner's guide to ProfileStore, linked in the description or up here in the corner. Once it's set up, come back here and then we'll start adding Game Passes to it. Okay, so you've set up the basic version of Data Store, which I didn't want to put in this tutorial so that it wouldn't get too long. But now that you have it, let's review our scripts that we made from that video and make sure we know what's going on. You should have at least 3 scripts that we wrote in the first tutorial. One is the data init script, which sets up data tables for each new player when they join. One is the template script, which stores the base data that each player starts with. And the last one is the data manager script, which is a modular way of adding and changing to our players' data. In server script service, we have 2 folders, data and libraries. Libraries just contains the ProfileStore module itself, which we don't need to go into. And data contains our data init, manager, and template scripts. Product manager is from part 2 of the tutorial series, but if you haven't watched that, don't worry about it. We're not touching this today. So to get Game Passes set up, we're going to add 2 new scripts into our project. The first one is going to be a module script inside of this data folder in server script service. And we'll go ahead and rename this to Gamepass Manager. Then we'll press this plus icon right here, add another module script, and rename this one to Gamepass List. Gamepass List should be underneath as a child of Gamepass Manager. Now let's talk about what exactly these 2 scripts are going to do before we go ahead and get into them. To do that, I'm going to drop a little comment up top here so that we know throughout this entire video what each script is for. The Gamepass Manager is going to manage buying Game Passes and syncing data between the profile and what the player owns within Roblox's servers. The Game Pass List module is going to store Game Pass names, product IDs, and award functions. And don't worry, we'll go into more of what these mean in a little bit here. Let's rename module to Game Pass List here so that we know which script we're in when we're just looking at it. And we'll do the same thing inside of manager here. Gamepass Manager instead of module. Let's go on over to our template module and first thing, add in a new table here called Game Passes. For each of the 3 Game Passes that I've already created on the website, this table is going to store 2 pieces of data. We need to store whether or not the player owns the Game Pass and also whether it's been awarded for the first time. Sometimes when you buy a Game Pass, you want it to do something right off the bat when it's purchased, but you only want it to happen once. So we'll keep track of that as well as whether if the player owns it or not. This is going to be a pretty simple process here. We'll open up a bracket and then set that bracket equal to a new table. Inside this bracket, we're going to create a string, and then from within the Creator Hub, we'll copy the asset ID of each pass, like VIP here, and then bring it back into Studio and paste it in right here. You might be wondering, why are we putting a number in as a string? Well, that's because within Roblox, if you have a table like this, and these keys of the table are indexed with numbers that are out of sequence, they're not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The numbers are, these asset IDs with gaps in between them. Things are going to save improperly within the data store. So instead of that, we'll just use strings. Now, the actual data we're going to be saving for this pass ID, which let's add in a comment real quick and say this is the VIP pass because these numbers get pretty confusing. We're going to store if the player owns the Game Pass, so owned equals false because this is a starting player. And then we'll also say awarded equals false because we want to keep track of whether or not the pass has actually been initially awarded to each player. Now it's pretty simple. I'm just going to do this 2 more times for each other Game Pass that I've created. So an empty brackets equals an empty table. And inside of this bracket, I'll copy the asset ID of the gold Game Pass and then come back into Studio, paste it in, and owned and awarded is false. And this is the 2 times gold game pass. Last one, pretty easy, copy 2 times gems. Then we'll bring it back, paste it in as the third entry here, and we'll make sure to get owned and awarded in there and start them off as false. And this is for the 2 times gems game pass. I'll add a comment up here so you remember, must save pass IDs as strings. Don't forget to do this because it will cause errors later on. Now this is all we actually need to do within the template because this is what the structure of our Game Pass data saving setup is just going to be. And so now we're going to come back into our Game Pass list module here and do a very similar thing. The first thing we want to do here is actually tie a name for each Game Pass to their ID number. And we'll do this really quickly by saying Game Pass list dot create a new entry here called names. And we'll set that to an empty table. Within this table, we'll say VIP equals a blank string. And then we'll also say gold times 2 equals a blank string. And gems times 2 equals another blank string. Now we need to put the pass IDs into each one of these strings, and we can just copy those over from the template. So VIP, copy that, paste it in, 2 times gold, copy and paste, and 2 times gems, copy and paste it right here. You might be wondering, why are we doing this in 2 places? Why do we have these Game Pass IDs saved in the template and in this Game Pass list? And the reason is because this template is going to change for each player. This data will be different depending on who owns which Game Pass and when they bought it. So we want these to be stored for each player, but we also need a separate list which will never change that just is a good reference for our Game Pass data. And the purpose of this name table is to actually assign a Game Pass name to its ID, because we don't want to have to remember these sequences of numbers and these product IDs for each Game Pass. It's going to be a lot easier if we tie them to a name, and then when we're trying to buy a Game Pass, we just give it the name of the pass we want to buy. And let's create a function to do exactly that. We'll say function GamePassList.get Game Pass ID. We'll just give it the name of the Game Pass we want, which is a string. We're going to typecast it as a string here. Within this function, we will just return GamePassList.names of the name. Now, if you remember what we said, sometimes when you buy a Game Pass like VIP, you might want the player to all of a sudden get a new name tag or a few things to happen right when they purchase it. In that case, we're going to need some award functions. These will be called one time when the player first buys or first enters the game with the Game Pass owned, and they'll make sure any awards that need to happen just on the first time get initialized. We'll create a new table within our Game Pass list called functions here. And within this table, let's add a comment. We'll say award functions for Game Passes called once when bought. So let me show you what I mean here. The first thing we're going to do is add the VIP award function. Pretty simple. We'll copy this asset ID from up here and paste it in to a bracket. And this will reference a function. To this function, we'll just want the player that purchased the Game Pass. And for now, this will be pretty simple. We'll just say print VIP Game Pass awarded. Of course, we don't yet have a way to buy and activate this, but we'll set this up in a second. I just want to knock this entire Game Pass list out real quick so you understand where we're coming from when we go and script this Game Pass manager to do all the purchasing. We'll do a very similar thing for these other 2 Game Passes, 2 times gold Game Pass. We'll add in a table here, paste this asset ID, and then set it to a function. Same deal. It's going to have a player type passed in, and then we'll just print 2 times gold Game Pass awarded. So you can probably figure out what we're doing here for the third one as well. 2 times gems. We'll put the ID right in here, just like so. Add the function for player, and then we'll print out something like 2 times gems Game Pass awarded. Now let's say for our game, I want to actually set this up, but we wanted to do some kind of name tag thing in VIP. All we would do is come to this line here, and maybe it fires to another script or a remote event or something to trigger some effect that, hey, the VIP Game Pass was successfully purchased. We would just do that right here. This will run once, and then it'll never run again. The way we'll also set this up to work is that if the player buys the Game Pass on, say, the game's page, like let's say for whatever reason the player's weird and he comes to the page of the game here and maybe buys the Game Pass in the store, forgetting about that image, you would still want to award the Game Pass when they join for the first time, even if they purchased it outside of the game, if that makes sense. So we'll also make sure to just set up the system so that it takes that into account as well. But yeah, that's all we need to do in the Game Pass list here. So let's just move right on to the Game Pass Manager. And this is going to be the bulk of our coding today. All right, now in the Game Pass Manager, we are going to need access to the player's profile, which is, remember, stored here in the Data Manager profiles table. So we're going to get a service to do this. First of all, we'll get the server script service. And once we have a reference to that, we're going to come down here and add in a little references tab. And then we'll just get access to the data manager by requiring it straight from the data folder like so. We also need this Gamepass list, which we created, and it's just a child of the script. So we'll also say local Gamepass list equals require script.gamepass list. Now we're going to need both of these because the very first and most obvious thing we need to do in this script is actually have a way to buy and prompt the Gamepass purchases. So we'll just do that right away by saying Gamepass manager, and let's create a new function called prompt purchase. And then what we need to give to this function for it to be successful is the player that we're trying to prompt a purchase for. And then we'll also say the name, which is a string of the Gamepass that we want to buy. I'm going to add in a comment right here too, so that we know exactly what this function is doing. So when we decide we want to prompt a purchase for the player, the first thing we need to do is get their profile from the data manager. And we'll do this by saying data manager.profiles of the player. And then if the profile does not exist, so actually if not profile, then we're just going to return an end. The profile doesn't exist, data can't be saved, so we're not going to try to prompt anything. Now, the reason we need the profile is because we really quickly need to check and see if the player owns this Gamepass. Now, there's a discrepancy here because we've passed in a name to the function, but in the template, we're storing the Gamepasses by their IDs just like so. So the way we're going to get around that is by using this nice function, which we built into our Gamepass list earlier to get the ID, and we will say within this prompt purchase, local pass ID, which is, we're going to remind you, a string is going to be the Gamepass list, and then we'll get Gamepass ID of this name. We're doing a little type annotation here and saying this is a string because later on we're going to need to do some things with the number of this pass ID and we'll have to convert it back. We're also going to have a sanity check under the pass ID, and we'll say if pass ID equals nil, then return end once again. This is going to be for some security reasons, as we'll let players actually prompt this function from across the client server boundary, and we only want them to be allowed to try to purchase something which we've defined. So we add this layer of security with the names. The player can give us a name, but if it's not found within our list of game passes, we're just going to cancel out. Instead of the player maybe being able to prompt themselves to buy a game pass, we don't want them to. And now the reason, of course, we need both of these is because we need to check if the player owns the pass from their profile. So we're going to create a variable called hasPass. This will be a Boolean, and it will just be a copy of profile.data.gamepasses, where we're storing all this data, of the pass ID that we're referring to, .owned. So remember, in our template here, we have owned and awarded. So we're going to check this owned value right here and say hasPass equals this pass.owned. Now, why are we doing this instead of sending a request to the marketplace service, which we'll use later? There are methods we can check from Roblox to see if a player actually owns a game pass, but there's a reason we're checking it from our profile instead of from Roblox's servers. And that reason is because of gifted game passes. Now, whether or not you're going to use systems like this in your game, this is still a good thing to do, but in some games you'll see that you have the ability to gift game passes and products to other players, in which case, since you can't actually give someone a game pass for free or give them a discount on a game pass, what you can do is just flip this owned box within the profile. The functionality of it will be exactly the same, even though on Roblox.com it won't say that they actually own the game pass. So we're going to check from the profile here first, and I'm going to add in a print statement so we can see. We'll just say player.name so we know which player it is, and then we'll say requests game pass of the name that they sent in, and then right here I'm just going to say whether or not they own it. So hasPass. All right, so now hasPass is either going to be true or false right now. If hasPass is false, that means according to the profile, the player doesn't own the game pass, but that could still be incorrect. The player could own the game pass on the website and not in the profile yet. So now what we're going to do is perform a call to Roblox and check and see if they own the pass on their backend. We're going to need marketplace service for that. So let's add marketplace service up top here. Game get service, marketplace service. And a lot of comment here for clarity. Check marketplace for ownership, and then we'll update it in the profile if they do own it, but it hasn't been reflected yet. We're going to be making an asynchronous query to the Roblox servers right now, so we're going to do a P call. We're going to say local success, and then an optional message here. It's going to be P call, protected call, this function, and inside this we're going to say hasPass equals marketplace service user owns Game Pass async. Here we'll pass in the player's user ID as well as the Game Pass ID, which we have here, but remember it is a string. So we're just going to say toNumber and give it that pass ID. At this point, hasPass should equal whether or not the user owns the Game Pass in the backend of Roblox. If they don't, we'll say if not success, then there was some kind of error. So let's print out that error so we know what happened. Error while checking if player owns Game Pass. And we'll just print the message like that and then return because there was an error. So something along there failed. But now we're going to check hasPass one more time because it's just potentially been changed right here. So we're going to say another if hasPass equals to false. It's actually time to prompt the Game Pass purchase because we know they don't own it within their profile and we know they don't own it on the marketplace. And this is the easiest thing we'll do so far. We'll say marketplace service, prompt Game Pass purchase right down here to the player, and then another toNumber of pass ID, since this requires a number, not a string. Now we need to add an else if statement here because otherwise if hasPass equals to true, now we know that the reality of whether or not the player owns this on the marketplace is out of sync with the data we have in their profile. We want to resync all the Game Pass data. And we will create a new function that's going to sync up all of the Game Pass ownership between the marketplace service and the profile. We do want it to still override though with what the profile has over the marketplace service so that you have the opportunity to use gifted Game Passes if you so desire in your game. Now I won't be setting up an actual gifted system today, but just know that the way we're doing it right now is going to leave you with more options and more doors open for the future. So I'm going to scroll down here past the end of the function and create a new function which will be Game Pass Manager : update ownership data. To this function, we'll just pass in a player that is having their data updated. Now, we don't want to forget this, so I'm going to copy the name of this function here and then go ahead and pass it in with the player. So after a purchase is prompted, if the player doesn't own it in their profile, but does own it on the marketplace service, instead of prompting a new purchase, we're going to update and resync all of this ownership data. But before we fill in this function, this is going to be really useful for another situation as well, because when a player first joins into the game and we're running through our stuff and data in it here, remember there's a chance that the player could have purchased these Game Passes on the website. So what we're going to do is also get Game Pass Manager here in the data init script. And then when we initialize and synchronize all of our player data, wouldn't you know, this is a perfect spot for us to check all of our Game Passes and reflect any changes that have been made on the website into the profile. So we'll just need a reference here to the Game Pass Manager itself. So we'll get Game Pass Manager equals require server script service .data.Gamepass Manager. Don't worry if you don't have Product Manager. Again, that's from a different tutorial and we're not using it today, but we'll copy the Gamepass Manager here. Let's come down here and say Gamepass Manager update ownership data for the player, just to really quickly check and see if there's a discrepancy between the profile and what Roblox has in the market. So now let's go back to the manager and fill in this function. What exactly do we need this to do though? Obviously conceptually, I think I've said it multiple times here, but let's add in a comment. It's going to be checks and updates if player owns each Game Pass. Let's get the profile of the player again, just so we have access to their saved data. And then what we need to do is loop through every Game Pass within our Game Pass list here, do this same call from the marketplace service to check if they own the Game Pass, and then update the profile accordingly. So we're going to loop through all Game Passes. The table we're going to loop through here is the functions table because it has both of the things that we're going to need when we're updating Game Passes. It has the ID as well as the award function. So here in our loop, we can just say for pass ID, which is a string at this time, and award function in Game Pass list dot functions. So what do we need to do for each Game Pass that we have in the game? Remember, we wanted the profile to have priority because of the gifted passes opportunity in the future. So we'll first check the profile.data.gamepasses table, give it the pass ID we're looking at, and check and see if this player owns the pass already. And if the profile thinks that this player doesn't own the pass, so if hasPass equals to false, then what we're just going to do is check and make sure there's no discrepancy here. So we'll check the marketplace service to see if player owns pass. And now let's just copy and paste some stuff here. We're just gonna come up to our prompt purchase function, grab this whole bit, bring it down here and paste it in, because we're doing the exact same thing here. We're checking if they own the game pass, warning if they don't. However, instead of returning, we're gonna change this into a continue because we don't want it to break out of this whole function. We just want it to go to the next game pass in this list. Now at this point, has pass may have changed, and all we need to see is if has pass now equals true, if the player does own it on the marketplace. So if the player owns the game pass, save that the player does and award it. So what do we mean by save it? Simply, we mean this exact value from the profile, the .owned of each game pass. We're just going to set this to true because now we know it is owned and the player has the pass. By award it, if you'll remember, we're setting up these functions earlier for awarding for the first time of each pass. This little scenario here only happens if the player purchases the game pass from the website. So in this case, we already have this award function here. So now we just need to call the award function with the player who owns the pass, make sure this gets initialized for the first time, and then we're going to trip this flag in the template, this awarded variable, and that will make sure that we never try to award it again. So I'm going to copy this, and instead of .owned on the end, we'll say .awarded and set that equal to true. Now this function will again get called from the first time the player joins the game to check for any differences. It'll also get called here if the prompt purchase function here detects that there's a difference between the profile and the market. And we're almost done here with the Game Pass Manager. The last major thing we need to do here is listen for when the purchase that we prompt finishes. This is going to be the main thing and the main way that game passes are handled. Up to this point, we've been covering all of the edge cases and the scenarios where things could go wrong, but now let's cover if things go right. And we need to award the game pass if the purchase that we've prompted is successful. So we're going to have one last function here that does that very thing. We'll say function Gamepass Manager on prompt purchase finished. And this function is blank for now because there's a method of the marketplace service we want to connect this to. We prompt the purchase through the marketplace service. I'm going to copy this right here and scroll all the way down to the bottom. And down here, we can say marketplace service dot prompt Game Pass purchase finished. So that prompt has completed. The player's either clicked yes or no. And then within here, we're going to open up a new anonymous function. And this gives us a few variables which we want to pass along to this function up top. As the player, the pass ID that was purchased, and whether it was purchased or not. Now, instead of typing all of these out, it's going to be a little easier if you hit 3 periods, do the ellipses. This just wraps all of the variables into one. And then right here, we can say Game Pass Manager on prompt purchased finished and type in the 3 dots here again. So instead of having to type out all of these variables and waste time and space, it just says this represents all the variables. And then up in the prompt purchase finished, this is where we will actually bring out the variables like so. Player, Game Pass ID, which is a number here as it returns from the marketplace service, as well as was purchased, which is a Boolean, a true or false. Now what we're trying to do here is award the Game Pass initial function if the purchase succeeds. So really quickly, we want to say if was purchased equals false, then return. And we're also going to convert the Game Pass ID into a string. So equals to string of itself of Game Pass ID, because we're using strings instead of numbers, and this returns a number. Also here, we need the profile. So let's actually just copy and paste that from right here. We need this profile to save it, but don't worry, if the profile is errored out and it returns, that's fine, because the next time the player joins, it'll run through the ownership data section again. And if this Game Pass was successfully purchased, then it'll just pick up where it left off. That's the beauty of the way we've done it today. So the profile exists, the Game Pass was purchased because we filtered that out. So now we can just say profile.data.gamepasses of the pass ID, the Game Pass ID here, which we already turned into a string, .owned equals true. We're going to save that into the profile. Save Game Pass ownership. And the other thing we got to do in here is award the Game Pass function for the first time it's been purchased. So let's get a reference to the award function for this Game Pass ID by saying award function equals Game Pass list dot functions of Game Pass ID. Let's say we just purchased the VIP Game Pass. This will point to this function here. This award function variable will equal to this function right here. You guys know how much I love sanity checks, so we're just gonna make sure that award function exists just in case something goes very wrong. So if it exists, then right here we'll award it, but else we're just gonna have a warning printout. We'll say no award function for Game Pass, and then print out the Game Pass ID. so that if, you guys forget to define a function or something, this will tell you instead of it just being an unencryptable error. But yeah, if it does exist, we're in the clear. So let's call that award function. Let's just give it the player. Remember, this is all we wanted in these award functions was the player. Inside of here, if you need to modify their data or do anything else for the first time they've been purchased, we can get a copy to the data manager, do whatever you want, knock yourself out here. Just make sure this function will only get called once. So make sure you're only putting stuff in it that needs to get called once. And then after this award function has been ran, we cannot forget to save that it has been. Remember the .awarded thing in our game passes table. So for the game pass ID, .awarded equals true. Now to get this up and running and show you guys how it works, let's go ahead and create a quick GUI with some buttons that we can use to purchase the different game passes. I have the screen GUI from the last tutorial here, but if you didn't follow along, that's all right. Create a new screen GUI here and then create a script called buttons test, just a little local script here. And all we need within the script is replicated storage, a reference to the GUI, which is the script parent. All of this code here is from the past tutorial, so don't even worry about that. But inside this GUI, let's create a few buttons for each game pass. We'll create a text button. I'm just going to go ahead and move it to the right side of the screen just by doing something like this. We'll give it a little bit of text difference, make sure it's big text. And then this one can be VIP Game Pass. I'll make it a little bit bigger as well so you guys can read it. So there's the VIP one. I'm also going to name this button to VIP, duplicate it, rename it to gold, and move it down a little bit so that we can actually see it, and make sure to change this text in it to 2 times gold. And then the last one is gems. We'll have a different button for each one. The text needs to say 2 times gems so we know which one it's for. And I'll move it down just a little bit more. And then within the script here, this is a pretty easy implementation. All we're saying is GUI.VIP. Mouse button 1 click, listen to a click on that, and then we'll fire something. Oh, but we actually need something to fire. Duh. Open up replicated storage and let's add in a remote event. We're going to name it something like request game pass. And this is where we can actually get a little bit into security of purchases over the network like this. When we click on the VIP button, what we want to do is take replicated storage.request game pass, right, and fire the server. We're going to use this remote event for every game pass. So we want to fire over to the server which game pass we're trying to buy. Now it's not very secure to let the client fire to the server the ID of the product they're trying to buy. So instead what we're going to do is have the client fire over VIP here. So VIP spelt just like that, capitalized. We have this table here which ties names to their IDs, and that's what we're going to use for the security of this. So when we fire the server, we're going to fire over VIP just like that, and we'll do the exact same thing for these other buttons. So GUI.gold.mouse button 1 click, and we'll connect it to this function. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to copy and paste this because it's too long to write. And then we'll do gold times 2. Should have been spelt the same way. Yep. And then gems times 2 for this last one here. So we'll just copy this, change it to gems so gems gets working, and then gems times 2 at the end. Within our Game Pass manager though, we also need to listen to this remote event. So we'll come back into here. First, we need a reference to the replicated storage so that we can actually find this event. So we'll say up top replicated storage equals game get service replicated storage, copy that, and then down here under this prompt game pass thing, we'll say replicated storage.request gamepass.on server event connect, and within this anonymous function, it'll give us the player as well as the name of the game pass that they're trying to buy. And so then we just want to prompt the purchase. So Game Pass Manager, we have a function for that called prompt purchase. Pretty simple. Give it the player, give it the name of the game pass they're trying to buy, and now when we click any one of these buttons, it will fire the request game pass remote event, and within our Game Pass Manager, it listens to that, and then it tries to prompt the purchase of the Game Pass. I'm going to go ahead and press play here, and you'll notice that some things are printing out here, and because I created the Game Passes on the website, I actually already own them all. So if we look down here in the output window, you can see that each Game Pass said 2 times gems awarded, VIP awarded, 2 times gold awarded, and this is within the Game Pass list module. These are the functions that are only going to be called once, and this is a perfect example of the system working well. Roblox thinks that I bought these Game Passes on the website since I created them and I owned them before before I ever even played into the game. So it went through within the manager here, it ran the update ownership data, and it saw that my profile said I didn't own the passes, but the marketplace service said I did, and then it awarded them from right here. If I actually leave and rejoin, you won't see these print again because they've already been awarded. Nothing's coming out here. It's not going to try to award them for me twice. But because they've been awarded, that means I own them. So whenever I try to click one of these, we're going to get a print. Riley Bytes requests Game Pass VIP owned equals true. And that's because within the Game Pass manager, obviously I already own the Game Pass, so it won't try to prompt it for me. We can still test this. All we need to do is come to the test tab in Studio, make sure we're doing one player here as a local server, and press start. So now instead of playing as Riley Bytes within Roblox backend, I'm actually playing as player 1, and I don't own any of these Game Passes. So when I click VIP, pops up, and on the server side of things in the output, you can see that player 1 requests the VIP Game Pass owned equals false. And then if I actually purchase this as a test purchase, it succeeded. And after it's succeeded on the server end, you can see it's printed out VIP Game Pass awarded. Awesome. Now guys, I've got to leave it up to you exactly what you want your Game Passes to do, which is why they're just being printed out here. I hope that the principle behind it all and the system is just going to be something modular and easy for you to add on to. So what happens if you want to add a new Game Pass into your game? Well, it's going to be pretty simple. You come back to the website of Studio, create the pass, whatever we call this, bonus pass. Check it as for sale again so that, we can actually purchase it. This is a Pet Simulator 99 pass, so it's going to be 100,000 Robux. And then we'll just copy this pass ID. And back within Studio, how do we add this pass into our system? We have to do it in a few places, but it's not that hard to do. The first thing is to come into the template folder, add in the new entry to the table, pasting in the pass ID that we've just created, and then we'll add in this same structure, owned equals false, awarded equals false, as well as a comment here so we know it's the bonus pass, Pet Sim 99, whatever, rip-off pass you could call it. But once it's added into the template, we need to come into the Game Pass list here and add it in two places. We need to add bonus pass, paste in the ID just like that, as well as we need to add a new function for it. So that function is going to be much the same as the ones above it. The ID is the key and it equals this function, which just needs a player. And then here we can print off whatever the heck we want. Lol, get scammed, sincerely, Preston. And that's it. That's the process for adding a new pass. Of course, you need to go in and customize what you do when players actually own the pass. But the beauty of using ProfileStore to do this is that it becomes really easy to check and see if players own each Game Pass. Whenever we go into another script, like in our data manager, if we have the double gold pass, we can add in a check right here because it's all saved in the profile. We can see if the player owns the 2x gold pass pretty easily by checking if profile.data.gamepasses of, and then you'll just need to go into the template here, copy this ID, check if this .owned equals true. Then we have the amount here. So we want to double that amount times equals to 2. This way, if we own the Game Pass, whenever you add gold, you don't have to worry about checking it every time. It just checks it right in here, doubles it if you need be. You don't need to go into all of your other scripts, which change the player's gold and check for the Game Pass. We can just do it in this one place. All the Game Passes auto update, ownership is synced. It's great. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I really hope this was helpful. Not a very nice message down here. Now, if you've made it to the end and you're struggling with any of the scripts from this video, or you're having an issue or an error or something, go ahead and check the pinned comment under this video because I've linked a model of these scripts and you can go ahead and check it and compare it to yours. And also you can join my Discord server. Link is also in the description there. We have a big community now of people who like to help out. I'm in there all the time talking with people directly, but there's plenty of people who can help you with your problems, your development problems. Please don't use it as like some weird therapy. And we also are going to start hosting some events and doing some other challenges and things in there. More on that to come soon. But yeah, make sure you join the Discord server. And if you made it to the end of the video and you appreciate this, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, guys. It means the world to me. And leave some comments as well. Whatever you want to see in the future, whatever videos you want and tutorials you need, let me know. I can't promise I'll get them done right away or even soon if you look at my upload schedule, but I can add them to my extensive list of video ideas. And the more people that suggest and that want certain tutorials, the quicker they come out. Shout out to this one random guy who commented like 20 times on my videos asking for this Game Pass video. But that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.